Hi, welcome back to the channel. I'm Michelle, and today I'm going to be sharing part 2 of what I read for April. So the books I'm going to be covering for this video are the ones that I'm a part of book clubs for. So I'm a part of a book club with my library, and it's adults who read kids' books, and it's usually middle grade or young adult. And I'm a part of a church book club where we read different books. Each person picks a book for the month, and we discuss and read that book together. And the third one I'm going to talk about is one we've been using in our history curriculum, our O Freedom history curriculum. But that's going to round up what I've read for April. I will link up above my first video that talks about what I read in the first half of April. This is the second half. So I'm going to turn you around, give you a glimpse into the books, and talk about what I thought about them. So these are the 3 books: Turning 15 on the Road to Freedom, My Story of the 1965 Selma Voting Rights March, Alejebres, and Short Stories by Jesus. So I'm going to start with the kids' books first. So I'll start with this one, Turning 15 on the Road to Freedom. This, like I said, goes with our O Freedom history curriculum this year. We've been going over the civil rights movement. I do like that it's a true story, so you can see back in here the author. She was the youngest person to take part in the whole Selma to Montgomery March. Gives a little biography about her. But I like that it's shorter. So it is, we only read it, I think, over 2 weeks as part of the curriculum. I like the pictures in it. I love that it has actual real pictures from that time. But here is a look at the table of contents. But I liked it. I thought it was really good for all of us to hear. And again, having that narrative, we shouldn't just be hearing other people's interpretations of history and stories. And one thing that worked up really nice in here that meshed really well with our homeschool is we've been listening to freedom songs, and part of that is in the O Freedom, but also we've been using the Carnegie Music Hall Music Explorers program, and one of the options they have is freedom songs, where a woman goes over different freedom songs she's written. So we've gone over We Shall Overcome and different mashups like that, and it's been really meshing well. So I will link that specifically Carnegie Hall thing down in the description box for you if you want to check that out. But it really meshed well, and the kids get a chance to write their own songs using that program. But it follows the story of, as I said before, a girl and her experience being on a march from Selma to Montgomery. And it was really helpful. I especially love about O Freedom is that a lot of the read alouds or books you read together are from the perspective of a child. So you're talking about a specific event in history that actually happened and an actual child who went through that. I think that's really helpful for learners to be able to relate to and kids to relate to. And it goes over the harder parts. It's called Bloody Sunday, and how they were mistreated and why it was so important for this girl to continue the march, even though she had suffered beatings and attacks during the marches. What was important for her? She talks about that in the back, where we were determined to do something and we did it. If you're determined, you can overcome your fears, and then you can change the world. I think that's really important messaging to have for young people, because it can feel like, especially as a child or a young adult, you don't have a lot of power, especially when things are wrong in this world. But putting that power and realizing they have the ability to promote positive change in this world. This is another freedom song. We went over Ain't Nobody Gonna Turn Me Around. They have the power to do that, and we're only going to give them that power if we're really honest with our kids about the things that have happened and how they still affect today. So we had a really good conversation about voting rights and how some people to this day still have trouble voting because of people trying to stop them from it. So in the end, I did like that it had this section where it talks about specific people who died fighting for the right to vote. So it goes over quick biographies of them. And I think this is really important because, again, real life history we're having here. They go over what happened to them, how they died. I like that they bring in different, both black and white people. This was a religious leader who came to join the march, and he was killed for supporting black people. Same with this white woman. She was horrified by what was happening to the black population in Selma, so she came down to join the march, and she was killed for supporting that. I think it's really important for my children to understand as an ally that they have to use their power and privilege to raise those up who are discriminated against. So I did really enjoy this book. I think it was a good read if you're talking about the civil rights era or the specific treatment of people during that time. I think this is a great resource to use. Next, this was what we read for our library book club, and it was really good. I have to say, I'm not much for dystopian novels, which this is. I think a lot of dystopian novels really highlight, the difficulty and negative aspect of humanity. We often make really bad choices when pushed against a wall. So the first half was a little hard and depressing for me to read, but I'm glad that I kept reading. It does get really, really good, and I think it has really good messaging in it. So it's about I believe, 13-year-old boy, Leandro, and his sister, Gabby. This takes a place, I think it's 400 years, kind of after things go wrong on Earth, and these are the remaining people on Earth. And they find themselves in a city. This is where the last remaining people on Earth live, and there's a caste system. There's the people higher up that don't do anything, there's the people that do all the work, and how they're treated. And again, it was kind of harder to read the beginning because these are kids being mistreated, and it's just really hard, and they're starving. But I think it has good messaging in it overall, so if you can get through the kind of the harder parts to read, I think it's really an important message. But ultimately, his sister is caught stealing berries from the market, and the people in charge will go to any lengths to eliminate people from the population because there is food shortages, there's crops that are dying. So if you lie, if you steal, if you pretty much step out of line in any way, you're exiled from the city. And there's this idea that outside the city, since the Earth, they don't ever really explain what happened to the Earth, but since the destruction of the Earth, these creatures live outside of town, worms. And they kind of reminded me of when I was reading it, if you've ever seen the movie Tremors with Kevin Bacon, it reminded me of that, these big creatures that come out of the ground and eat people. So if you're exiled, you are thrown into a trench and die, or you are sent out into the wilderness where you could potentially be eaten by these giant worm-like creatures. And what happens to Leandro is he takes the fall for his sister, and he's got two options. Because he's underage, he is given a punishment instead of exile. So he can choose to be, and how they handle exile is they take their consciousness and they trap it for a certain amount of time, serving a sentence. So there's a woman on the council that gives him the option of putting his consciousness into a mechanical animal, which is something that came from the people before them, what they call the old world, or the technology of the old world. And the caveat of that is that in order for him to do this, he has to find the woman's daughter and bring her back in order to be reunited with his own body and consciousness. So the book's a lot about him finding other of these animals, and this is what, it's like a spirit animal is the translation. There's a lot of Spanish in here. So he meets different people's consciousness in different animals and kind of how they figure out what to do and save the people. And they find out that the city, the people who are in control, are going to start what's called a thinning process, where they're going to kill a lot of the people because, again, their crops are failing and they don't have enough food for everyone. So how are they going to rescue their people, dismantle those in power? So I did. I think it was a really good book, and I look forward to discussing it with my book group. The last one we read was for the Church Book Club, and this was Short Stories by Jesus by Amy Jill Levine. And it gives a little biography of her in the back. I think she's highly qualified to be writing about this. And what I really like about this is it's going over the short stories by Jesus. So you're going over parables, as you can see here, lost sheep, lost coin, lost son, and they're separated into different sections: the Good Samaritan, the Kingdom of Heaven. And the premise is that a lot of people just think you can pick up these stories or the Bible and read scripture and have an understanding of what they're about, but contextual knowledge is extremely important when reading scripture. and it's easy to pull out our own personal views or bias from what we're reading, but we're not really looking at how those stories were created for, a first century audience and how their reaction to it would have been, but also what the contextual knowledge, so what the culture was like at that time, how it affects the story. So what it talks about in here is reading a story without any contextual knowledge of the time or what was going, political system, anything. You're pretty much just reading a pretext of anything you want it to be. You can really pull out whatever you want. So I think bringing in the historical aspect of it, also the cultural aspect of it, is really important when understanding different parables that Jesus told his disciples. And I do like that she talks about different interpretations, and it's not, just, Joe over there thought this. It's different theologians and their thoughts, processes about how this is widely translated. And I do appreciate that she talks about the use of different words and translations and gives you the physical Greek of it and breaks it down and shows you where else that specific word is used in scripture and why that's important, because a lot of translations are going to have things like bias in it. They're going to pull certain aspects of it. So depending on what that translator chose to use, because there's not direct translations from necessarily biblical Greek to English, you're going to have the author or the translator taking certain privileges with that, and that's going to affect how the story is interpreted. But I thought it was really good to really dive into specifically how a first century audience would have viewed this story. And she talks a lot about Judaism because that is her background. And there's a lot of obviously anti-Semitic imagery and words put into these stories. And again, some of that is that bias coming through of people pulling information, but how Jewish people would have interpreted this as the time, Jewish laws. And I had studied Judaism in college. It's always fascinated me, and I have a deep respect for that religion. So it was really interesting to see that take, because again, not being of Jewish ancestry, I don't necessarily pull the things out of these stories that someone who comes from Jewish ancestry would. So again, having that multi-perspective I think is really important. Contextual knowledge is really important. I think it's also really funny in this book. She makes different jokes within it because it is kind of a heavier read. You're getting into scripture, you're getting into translations, and she does break it up into different sections. So you'll do one section at a time, and she'll kind of go over the different interpretations that are commonly used in it and her thoughts with that. But there is humor in this which lightens it up and makes it easier to read. It's something that you can't read in a couple days. It's something you have to read, digest, and go more into it. But I think one of the things she highlights really is that a lot of people want the answers but don't want to answer the questions. So it's not so much about the parables. What is the answers we're looking for? What does it mean to us? It's about what are the questions being raised from that parable. So switching that perspective. Also the simple truth that people are a lot more comfortable being told what to think or what to believe than to really question and think for themselves. And that's really important when we're reading scripture, and especially when we're looking to our religious leaders or our religious community, that we're listening to people who have studied these things, who are knowledgeable about not only biblical history, contextual knowledge, culturally, what was going on in the time of Jesus. These are important things. Someone just picking up the Bible and telling you what they think, I don't think is the best avenue to go. So I was a really big fan of this book, and I do like in the end how she has all these notes, because that's really important when you're talking about things that are pulling out of scripture and interpretations and different theologian thoughts. All of these are marked in the book, so that's a sign that you have someone that did the research. So I did really enjoy this book, and it's something I would recommend if you're looking to dive more into that area and get a bit more perspective and really understand how the contextual knowledge of the time of Jesus was important for the stories he was telling. So those were the 3 stories I read in the second half of April. And again, if you have any suggestions for me, leave in the comments below. I've already started a list of suggested books, so I really do appreciate if you have suggestions for me. If you have any questions questions about any of the books, let me know in the comments below. If not, thank you for watching.